Got something on.
Aaron, can you hear us?
Thank you. Now I can. I was just about to close out. Sorry, everybody. I wanted to be there in person, but last minute, I'm kind of fighting a cold and I doubt anybody wanted it.
Good idea. All right, very good. We're going to start with a roll call. Janice, would you please conduct the roll call?
Absolutely. When I call your juris. Well, no, we don't have anyone online. Okay. City of Corona. Kennett.
Jackie Peterson here.
Lake Elsinore.
Steve Manos.
Menifee. Moreno Valley. Present. Murrieta. Paris.
We.
Riverside.
See down right here.
Temecula. Willamar.
Joseph Morabito.
And County Riverside District 5. Thank you. That concludes roll call, and we have one.
So thank you very much. All right, so we're going to take public comment at this time. Members of the public can address the board regarding any item within the subject matter jurisdiction of the board that are not separately listed on this agenda. Members for the public will have an opportunity to speak on any agendized item at this time. The item at any time that the item is called for in terms of discussion. No action may be taken on items not listed on the agenda unless otherwise authorized by law. Whenever possible, lengthy testimony should be presented to the board in writing, and only for pertinent points would be presented orally. And that takes, do we have any members of the public?
No, sir.
Yeah, very good. All right, so we're going to go ahead and move on to the consent and policy calendar. All items listed under the consent calendar are considered to be routine and may be enacted by one motion. Prior to the motion, to consider any action by the board, any public comments of this item shall be heard. Do any members of the public wish to comment on the consent calendar? Hearing none. Do we have any requests? No questions?
No, sir.
Very good. If a member of the board requests a specific item be pulled for discussion from the consent calendar, we will have that discussion and then vote on the consent calendar as a whole to avoid multiple discussions. Do we have any members of the board that wish to pull any items?
Move to approve, Mr. Chair.
Move to approve. We got a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
We got a motion by agency member Vargas, second by past chair Morabito. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor, please indicate so by saying. Oh, excuse me. This will be. Is this still going to be a roll call vote? Or we take a vote?
No roll call vote. No one has is voted.
Very good. So all those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. And please note the addition of Tom Richens to the meeting is he voted and it is 11:33. Thank you. All right.
Love that permanent record.
No getting out of that one. All right, so that takes us to item 6, reports and discussion. Members of the public will have an opportunity to speak on agendized items at this time when called for discussion. Item A is election of leadership for calendar year 2024. So item 6.8 is presented by the RCHCA's Brian Shomo regarding the election of leadership for the 2024 calendar year. Brian,
Okay. Thank you, everyone. It's that time of year again. Seems like it went really quick this year, but item 6A, the item before you, is the election of leadership for the 2024 calendar year. And so RCHCA policy number 004 addresses the nomination and election of the board of officers. The RCHCA board member Steve Monis has acted in his capacity of vice chair for the past year, and in accordance with board policy, board member Monis shall become the chair for 2024. Should he desire to do so, board member Monis has expressed interest in serving as the chair for the next calendar year, and the board is being requested to nominate and elect a chair and vice chair to assume the office in 2024. The candidates receiving a majority of the vote will become the new chair and the vice chair.
thank you, Brian. Do we have? Oops, sorry.
Sorry. The requested action is to nominate and elect a chair and vice chair for the calendar year 2024.
Okay.
I'll nominate Steve Manos as chair.
I'll second it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? We will take a voice vote. All those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes unanimously with all members present voting in the affirmative. Brian, am I going to hand this back to you, or should we go to vice chair? If I go with the vice chair, all right. So I'm going to open up the nomination. Open up the floor for nominations for vice chair. Who? Let the night fight begin. Who would like to be vice chair? Anyone?
I mean, I'm willing, but I don't know, so I was recently, so I don't know if we want to pass it around to somebody who hasn't had that.
Anybody else interested or willing? All right.
He just came off of it?
He's.
Well, I was
chair this
there
year.
last year.
No, well, you're done.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so then I'll nominate agency member Fargus for vice chair. Excuse me?
Nothing.
Can we get a second?
I'll second.
All right, got a motion, a second. Any other nominations? No one fighting, unite fight is over. All those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. All members present voting in the affirmative. That takes us on to item B, status update on the Stevens Kangaroo Rat recovery efforts. Item 6.B is presented by Wayne Spencer regarding species recovery efforts for the Stevens Kangaroo Rat. Dr. Spencer is a wildlife conservation biologist with over 35 years of experience in biological research and conservation planning. He is with Conservation Biology Institute and has been working on the SKR range-wide management and monitoring plan for the past 5 years.
Thank you.
Where's yours?
Do I have presentation? Oops, that's not right. Don't remember which button I pushed there.
Left
Okay.
goes back, right goes forward.
Oh, okay, good to know.
Just gonna hit the eject button.
Okay, so I'm giving you an update on the status of the range-wide management monitoring plan, and I'm happily giving you a report on the first 2 years of systematic monitoring for this species that has ever been done. So this is sort of a milestone. For me, this is personally gratifying. I've been doing endangered species research and conservation for over 40 years, and it was over 30 years ago that I handled my first Stevens kangaroo rat in the city of Corona, I believe, in what is now a housing development. At the time, there was some habitat. They're lovely little creatures, and I understand that none of you are biologists or mammalogists, so I'll give a little bit of background in species before I get to numbers and what's really relevant. A little refresher on what this is all about. I mean, RCHCA has long been doing the heavy lifting of SKR conservation under the Stevens Kangaroo Rat Habitat Conservation Plan. But there's a lot of other land use entities and agencies that have responsibility for SKR that are doing things their way. And there was a decision led by RCHCA, Princess Hester, in years back, that we ought to better coordinate. And she pulled together U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and a group of scientists with and managers like Brian with expertise in SKR and kicked this thing off several years ago. The first big step was our institute, Conservation Biology Institute, which has a lot of technical expertise with developing ecological models, species habitat and population models, things like that. We developed the first range-wide habitat value map for the species, so we kind of knew what we were looking at. We didn't have a complete picture of where SKR were and could be, but this has been a totally collaborative effort, really with RCHCA as serving more or less as sort of an informal lead agency and leadership on this. But important partners, BLM has provided a lot of the funding. Fish and Wildlife Service, of course, is a key partner because a lot of this is for their regulatory benefit to do their jobs better. The San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance has contributed their expertise, especially with population genetics analyses, which are important. So this was a long overdue collaboration, and it's been really gratifying for me because I started again trapping these guys when they were really on the slide to extinction before there was any habitat conservation plan or multi-species conservation plans. Now we have not only RCHCA's preserves and leadership, but we brought in more partners, and we have the first range-wide management and monitoring plan for the species. I wanted to give you a little background on the biology of this critter. Again, I know you're not biologists, but you have oversight over an important member of our ecosystem here. Stevens kangaroo rat is one of about 20 different species of kangaroo rats. People don't realize that. There's about 20 different species of kangaroos in sort of the arid regions of North America, from the Great Plains down into Mexico, a lot of it in the deserts. And here in California, we've got several species that are really isolated geographically, including the SKR. There's the range map, that gray blob, mostly in Riverside County and some in northern San Diego County. But at the time this range map was completed, we didn't yet have the complete picture. And actually, we've expanded this range map a little with the work that we're doing. Obviously, the SKR was declining towards extinction because of it happens to live in places that are highly developable and good for agriculture, and so they lost a lot of habitat over the years. It was one of the very first species listed as endangered in California before there was even an official state Endangered Species Act. It got a special recognition, and it's been listed under the U.S. Endangered Species Act since 1988. As I'm sure you're all aware, because of your actions, largely, it got downlisted from endangered to threatened just a few years ago, a step in the right direction. But the reason we're doing this range-wide effort, and what I'll be reporting on, the first range-wide kind of comprehensive, systematic status assessment, is that's necessary to prove that we're moving towards actual delisting, to get the numbers to show that this is a species that can be removed from the endangered species list altogether. You need good numbers for that. Again, most of this work has been funded by the Department of Defense and the Department of Interior through an agreement with RCHCA, and they gave Karin to the contract to do the technical work and guidance, working with everybody. You'll see that Brianna put the ninjarat.org GIF in there. I encourage you, for your fun, if you want to know more about kangaroo rats, visit ninjarat.org. They have a whole bunch of videos that are not only educational, super entertaining, and it'll show you how remarkable the critter is that you have responsibility for. They're amazing athletes. Anyways, so check out ninjarat.org when you're looking for a laugh. Why do we need a range-wide approach? I already touched on this. We need to standardize the population monitoring so that we can have a full picture across the range. It'll assist the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service with their 5-year status assessments, which are necessary to track recovery. They need solid numbers to really make good decisions. Also, to facilitate better management. Currently, each land management entity that has some responsibility for SKR is doing their own thing with different pots of money, different expertise. Some have monitoring requirements, some don't. Some do active management like RCHCA, some don't. We wanted to come together and coordinate so that people could share resources, agencies, to do better range-wide adaptive management. Again, RCHCA kind of leading the way with most of the leadership in how to manage and monitor the species. Now other partners are coming on board to join in that. And overall, it's to better advance the range-wide conservation and recovery goals to get the species ultimately to delisting. You're probably aware, it's on your web page. The plan is there for anyone to download. It's on your website. It's on Fish and Wildlife's website. It's on CBI's website, readily available. What you may not know is CBI also were the creators of Data Basin, which is a conservation mapping and data sharing network that's used, or platform that's used worldwide. Many people, thousands and thousands of maps and spatial data sets. We created a special page just for this effort, and all of the data and maps and reports and things that are involved are there for anyone to download, look at. You can make your own maps. You can view the maps if you're a geek who's into that kind of thing. It's all there for you to use, and it's a complete synthesis. The report is everything we know about this species, its habitat, its genetics, its ecology, how to manage and monitor, what are the threats, how do we address those. It's all one-stop shopping And importantly, it has the conservation, it explains the conservation toolbox that people can use. What are the best management techniques? How do we monitor? How do we manage data? How do we coordinate these multiple agencies that have responsibility? Okay, I'm going to switch to 2 years of monitoring. Again, this is a milestone. First time ever a systematic range-wide effort to get numbers. You all probably realize, like in politics, it's important to have unbiased polls. You don't know how you stand in the vote if you just go to your friends and ask them who you're going to vote for. You need a standard, unbiased, objective way to get a measure of where things stand. And so we came up with this method, and I'm happy to report it's worked better than we expected it would, because this is a very complicated thing. How do you survey over all of these scattered preserves over a large area with multiple entities and get unbiased numbers as to how the species is distributed and how it's doing over time? We worked with a statistician who's an expert in endangered species monitoring programs, and we came up with the system that we generate roughly 10-acre grid cells over the entire range of the species, as long as they fall within a land that we have access to, which are mostly the reserves, also military lands and some other non-reserve lands where we can gain access. As long as they're an SKR habitat and we can gain access, they're randomly selected according to habitat value. And then the biologists like Brian and Rihanna go out in the field and they survey these. And they look for signs. The upper right picture, it's not actually an SKR shot, but those are, you see a crossroads in the trails of a different species of kangaroo rat in the Arizona desert. Good biologists can go out in the field and detect where you have kangaroo rats based on their burrows, the signs, their droppings, that sort of thing. If they find them, then you trap to confirm that it's the right species, because there's another species that could occur in the same habitat areas, and we want to make sure it's SKR. And we want to get a local population density index. So there's two things we're looking at. How are they distributed across all these randomly selected cells, and where they are found, how many are there, right? And so coming up with the standard protocol was difficult because, again, every entity that has monitoring responsibilities was doing it their own way, and nobody wants to change. RCHCA actually made some compromises, changed some of your protocols to be more consistent with others so we could pool data better. And I think Brian would agree it's worked. So I'll get to the, so anyways, they go out, they survey, and when they find sign, they cite where these 25 traps, live traps, will be put where you have the greatest possibility of catching, like where the most burrows are, where you're most likely to get the best numbers. Then they go out and trap it. Oops. One of the things that we did, CBI's experts worked with RCHCA to come up with a mobile field app. You go out with your iPhone in the field, built-in GPS that keeps track of time. It has drop-down menus for data recording so that the biologists can go out. They're working at night. It's black out there because you want to work in the darkest nights when the rats are most active. I don't know how well you can see it, but on that right panel, you can see 3 green squares. Those are 3 of these randomly selected sites. They have to go out and find these at night and do the trapping in the dark. You can see the red trace of the GPS of how they get from place to place in the dark to make sure they're finding efficiently their locations. And then once they do the trapping, they have this app where they can just record the data automatically. There's drop-down menus. It makes it very efficient compared to our old way of pen and clipboard and paper, and then having to go back to the office and type it into a database, which makes more error potential. So once they record the data, it can just be uploaded automatically to our database, and we have a systematic, nice set of numbers to work with. I think it's worked pretty well. Okay, here's some numbers. Again, the first 2 years of systematic surveys ever done for the species. RCHCA has done by far the bulk of the survey effort, not only on your reserves, but others as well for on BLM and Fish and Wildlife and other reserves. They don't have access for the military who does their own thing. But in 2022, they surveyed pretty much the maximum possible that humanly possible under all the constraints, about 80 of these randomly selected cells. So 81 in 2022, 79 in 2023. Our sampling design has us go out to some of the same cells. So 48 of those 81 were trapped the second year as well, because you want to see how they're changing over time in the same places. And then 31 new places were added in 23, and we'll continue doing that. Repeated visits to some of the cells so we can track change over time, but adding more cells to get a more complete spatial picture. The important thing here is in this blue box, the numbers that biologists and Fish and Wildlife Service will pay most attention to. Percent occupancy is how many of those cells actually have SKR. You can see in 2022 is about 52% of them. It dropped to about a third of them in 2023, and I'll talk about that. Also with the trapping, you catch from 1 to 10 animals per site, which is actually for wildlife sampling is a really good range. An average of 3.8 per cell were captured in 2022. It dropped to about 3 animals per cell on average. So again, a slight decrease. And these numbers, this apparent decrease is not really a cause for alarm. We expected it because of the super heavy rains, the record rains of last winter. You're probably aware that SKR, because of their bounding nature and their food habits and everything, they need bare ground to move around. And when you get so much rain, the grasses become so thick they can't move around. It crowds out their favorite food plants, which are the flowers, the annual flowers that produce the seeds they prefer. So we expected this drop after those very heavy rains, which can also directly harm SKR by getting them wet and flooding their burrows in some cases. So this was not unexpected. Oh, and by the way, the photo in the upper left, you can see an example of one of their burrows that people are looking for. And there's the live trap with a kangaroo rat next to it, just so you have a feel. So again, this is not cause for alarm. It was kind of expected. Here you can see those results mapped. The green blobs are where there's suitable habitat for SKR. You can see it's very fragmented. It used to be, before humans changed the landscape, much more continuous swaths. Now it's very fragmented. And the yellow blobs show how many kangaroo rats were captured at these sites. You can see in your region, mostly RCHCA reserves and some of the others in Riverside County, the results were pretty good in 2022. There's a lot of captures, widespread. In San Diego County, not so good. We don't yet have the military data, which I'll talk about. So there's no data for Camp Pendleton and Fallbrook and some of the other military lands. In 2023 on the right, you can see again, the distribution dropped a little and the number per grid cell dropped some as we anticipated. But there's another reason for that drop, and Brian can fill you in more if there's questions. During trapping at Lake Matthews, there was an unusual thunderstorm. It was September or early September. And that apparently the kangaroo rats don't like to be out when it's bright because the predators see them. When you have heavy cloud cover in sort of an urban landscape, it's very bright on the ground when you have clouds reflecting the city lights down. So probably because of that, the kangaroo rats were much less active and the trapping results went down. So to look specifically at those results in the Lake Matthews Reserve, on the left, again, 2022, on the right, 2023. Those green squares are the cells that were sampled. Some are the same from year to year, some are different. The yellow blobs show where they were captured. You can see on the right, there were far fewer captures. The purple squares on the right were where the kangaroo sign disappeared from one year to the next. And so that's, and I'll come back to that. And you also see that the green cells on the right where there was trapping but no captures. So again, some of this was due to the rainfall and the heavy cloud cover when they trapped. It probably suppressed the results. But also, and Brian can tell you about this, most of those purple ones, I believe, tend to be year after year really good habitat because they have the good soils. SKR prefer very loamy soils that drain well. They support the best plant cover for them. With the super heavy rainfalls we got, again, the vegetation increased, so it wasn't so good for them. RCHCA tends to do their habitat management, grazing and prescribed fire primarily, in the cells that don't have the best soils, because they need the most help. And your management brings that, so like south of the lake, the management improves those to make it more comparable to the ones that are naturally really good. But in a super unusual rain year like we had, since these good, traditionally good habitat areas weren't as directly managed, the numbers dropped. Whereas in the places where they were managed, they stayed. So the kind of the bottom line is here, not cause for alarm, but it reinforces that the habitat management works. The decline was mostly in places that weren't actively managed to benefit them. And next year we'll probably pop right back.
We don't get rain.
Yeah, if we don't get too much rain. Is there anything you want to add to that? You have the first.
No, I think you explained it well. I mean, really, when we were trapping Lake Matthews, there was unexpected thunderstorm that popped up. It was really high humidity and they weren't calling for a thunderstorm. It moved through really quickly, but the cloud cover, as Wayne said, it looked like daylight out there. The first night of trapping, there was no small mammal activity, including SKR. The second night of trapping, it started to increase, but because of the sampling survey design, the methodology, we only trap for 2 nights instead of traditionally we have gone several more nights. But to make things more efficient, we only trap 2. And by that point, it was just too late. I think if you excluded Lake Matthews and you went to other reserves, the numbers and the occupancy kind of stayed the same. Lake Matthews is kind of pulling those results down. And if we could, if it was good science, we'd go back and retract that. But our statistician says that's a no bueno, so for science. So we can't go back there. It is what it is. But there is kind of this anomaly. And that's why we wanted to point out Lake Matthews. In 2022 is one of the highest areas of SKR occupation that we had within the entire region. But because of the unusual weather system and because of the high vegetation growth, as Wayne said, and other reasons, north of Cajalco Road, as you can see the lake, the reservoirs there, we're really limited in the management that we can do there. We aren't allowed to graze there because of cryptosporidium and sheep feces. And we're really only allowed to use herbicide and prescribed burns. And prescribed burns is rather limited. And north of El Sobrante Road this year. So those areas didn't get much attention besides mowing and some herbicide use. And so that kind of impacted the results. But I think the important take home message is that, again, I think there was an anomaly with Lake Matthews, but if we could pull it out, you'd see throughout the range, the occupancy then wasn't statistically significant in its decline. Right. So they're still scattered spatially where we think they should be. The numbers have dropped though. The abundance of them have dropped. But that's expected.
It'll come back.
Yeah, they're technical
Populations do that. Okay. A quick note on the military lands. As I mentioned, we tried to collaborate with them, all the entities that are doing their own monitoring, to try and get as much on the same page as possible so we could pool data. And it didn't work very well. The military has their ways and their contracts and their contractors and work with USGS. Every military base, and I think there's 4 of them with SKR, they're listed at the bottom down there. They do it differently in every place, and we just can't pool the numbers statistically. They're not compatible. US Fish and Wildlife Service has now taken the lead to try and arm twist a little bit to get the military to follow our protocols. Some of them have long-term data sets that much more intensive and much more expensive than what we're doing here. And they don't want to disrupt that, but we're asking for actually fairly minor changes to their protocols so that we can pull their data in and really get a range-wide estimate.
I want to reminder that this is funded primarily from DoD, WLF. And so the military has a great interest in reducing or recovering a species and reducing the burden on any military installation or its training mission. And so we just have to connect the right dots and get them on board. Again, they have a long history of monitoring for SDR. They just do it in a slightly different fashion that we can't use the results, and getting them to change that, that aircraft carrier around takes a little bit of time and a little bit of convincing. So we're on the right path. I think we have a few meetings set in the near future here with some of the installations, and hopefully we'll get them on board.
Right. So, some quick conclusions. The heavy winter rains of last year may have negatively impacted SKR. That was to be expected. They'll bounce back. Vegetation management really seems to work to counter these sorts of things, especially where you can do it. The big grazing and prescribed fire work that RCHCA has been doing really seems to help. We do know from the numbers that overall there's better occupancy and higher numbers on RCHCA reserves compared to other areas because they are specifically managed to benefit SKR. Multi-species reserves, it's for everybody. Military lands, it's for military training, and they just have to do what they have to do. But they're not specifically trying to benefit SKR. And so where you are managing to benefit SKR, it's working. We recommended some minor adjustments to the trapping methods. I won't go into details to improve the capture rates given we get heavy rains like we did this past time. We need to update our SKR habitat value map. It's 6 years old in terms of the input data. Things have changed. We have much better data now from these 2 years of polling unbiased numbers to improve our habitat value map, and that will be a foundation for future monitoring. The range-wide protocols need to be followed on military lands. We just talked about that. And again, we only have 2 years of data. Our statistician says we won't really know. We won't have any faith in trends for the population until we have at least about 5 years of data. Because there is natural noise and variability. So 2 years, it's a great baseline. I'm thrilled with the numbers we've gotten. But after 5 years of this, we'll have a much more clear picture. So I'll just wrap up with questions and a reminder that ninja rats are cool.
Thank you, Wayne. Do we have any questions from any of the agency members?
Comments and stuff. So you just mentioned a lot of that about the difference in, I guess, the number you collected. You gave some reasoning behind that. And you're not suggesting that the population went down, it's just the count went down.
The count went down, the population declined year to year fluctuation. But small mammals are expected to be cyclical. We want to see, as Wayne said, the noise, it'll look like this from year to year. But you want to see over year to year, and that's why we have the last 5 years, because 2 points on a graph is just a line. That point's not a trend. It could go down and go up, but the long-term trend, despite that noise, could continue to go up, or at least remain stable. So that's what we're looking for. So yes.
Because I'm guessing that amount, when it comes to trying to figure out, because they're not gonna respond to a survey or whatever, right? They're hiding. So it's not quite like how many kids are in the school district, because they're in there. So this isn't right. To some degree, you're gonna have luck involved.
Yeah.
Whether you get a good count one time versus another.
Yeah.
That's all it is. And I have the every lovely comparison, the cockroach comparison, where if you find one, then there's the others in the wall. You can deduce how many are there.
And there's other things that we're looking at that we may implement. For instance, our sampling methodology is pretty rigid. We have 10 meters between traps and 10 meters between track lines. We don't move those. Typically, when you do a small mammal bird survey, Biologists take a little bit of leeway. So if you see an active burrow right here, but your line that the trap should be right here, you move it over because you know there's an active burrow. With us in the sampling methodology, we're very strict. And so we keep that trap right here. We know there's an active burrow 3 feet over here, but there's a wall of vegetation between there. And so you know it's active, but it's not showing up in your trap. And so we may alter the protocol a little bit to allow us to do what normally biologists would do, is move it over to that active burrow site in order to increase it, capture success and all that. There's a little bit of nuance to it. But overall, I think the monitoring program is doing what it was designed to do. The collaboration's been instrumental, trying to get 30 some different entities on board, and moving in the right direction. Everybody has to pull their own weight in a sense. We're doing a bulk of the lifting, but everybody has to pull in the same direction. That's the most important thing, to get those consistent results. At U.S. Fish and Wildlife, when they do a 5-year status review, they can say, yeah, everybody's kind of counting the same. We know what's out there, and what's out there and where they're at. So I think that's the important take home message. Year-to-year fluctuations. I want to update you on that. Again, I try to set your expectations in previous meetings that we are expecting it. It's natural, nothing to be worried about. If we would see that kind of downward trend over 5 years, that's something. But as I'll get into in the next couple of slides, and Wayne touched on, management's essential to the species. You can turn very poor habitat into very high abundant SKR habitat, just through management alone. And so that's going to be a trick, a little thing that we're going to have to do along the way, is get some of these other areas that aren't actively managing on board and managing. And that goes in part with the BLM grant that we got previously this year. So we have that $1.2 million from the BLM to purchase a lot of equipment. That also pays for time and use of that equipment. We have offered it to other entities that may not be able to afford that kind of equipment, say Lake Paris. They have asked us about it in one of our slides to basically mow stink net and spray stink net and stuff like that at Lake Park, State Park Lake Paris. City of Riverside, we're in recent talks with to help them manage Sycamore Canyon Wilderness Park, which is an SKR district. So there's other things we can do. How can we grow at that risk?
And then just one quick question.
Yeah.
So are these pictures like ones you've taken, or are they more like stock? I'm just curious because
It's a combination.
Combination, yeah.
so then are they're really that docile? They're not gonna bite you?
No, they're really sweet little
Okay.
animals. They don't bite. All they do is helicopter their tail. Unless you get a DKR, which is a Dozora kangaroo. So
Oh,
if it was species that Wayne was talking about can live side by side, you can almost tell behaviorally the difference. They're much more hyper and aggressive. Yeah, it doesn't enter banging away at it, and FDR just chill.
Yeah, like, again, there's about 20 different species. I've trapped about half of them, and their personalities vary. SKR is one of the most docile, peaceful little ones. Miriam's kangaroo rats are very peaceful. Boy, Ward's kangaroo rats, be careful, don't bite yet. They're aggressive and active, but they're all amazing athletes at their jump. They're they're like kangaroos.
based on your description of the SKR, I was not an SKR child.
Yeah, they're pretty gentle, and the best photo up there is from Moose Peterson, who's a professional wildlife photographer, and I captured that animal in the Ramona grasslands in the 90s, and he took that photo, and you'll find it all over the internet. Everybody uses that one. A lot of the other ones were Brian and Brianna and their crew. The very first slide at the beginning was one I took. So it's a mix.
Any other questions?
You use millet?
Yeah, we use sterilized millet well, it's birdseed, but with a high concentration of millet. It's primarily millet. The trick about it is you have to microwave it for 10 minutes, and we learned that by we didn't used to, and we threw it out there, and all of a sudden you had stuff. So you microwave it, and it smells like peanut butter again. It really attracts them. If you ever done some rodent trapping in your house, sometimes people bait the trap with like peanut butter and stuff like that. It's highly effective. So yeah.
Do you have a schedule for when you're gonna go out again? Because I know Dr. Wilson said that we could come along.
Absolutely. We always open it up to board members. This range wide plan is typically kicking off in September and October, might depending on whether it goes through November, but every year will be done primarily September, October. And so we'll send it out when we
Okay,
get
that's.
absolutely.
that's
Absolutely.
Wonderful.
Yeah, we used to have a couple board members go out with us. I think it's a neat eye-opening experience. One, just to be out there in the midnight, the remotest, darkest regions of the county and stuff like that. But then actually see the animal that you guys actually oversee. It's very interesting.
Thank you.
So when you guys do the trapping and you establish those areas, I can imagine that these animals are kind of feeder food for some other type of predators, right? And then, so, you could have some displacement, once if you get a lot of, food in one place, obviously there's gonna be return visits and maybe they change their habits and put that out. How do you account for that? And how does that work?
If we had predation on a trap line, say we got coyotes or raccoons even, when I first started trapping like 16 years ago or so, over at Lake Paris, because we were proximity to the campground, we had raccoons that come in and they would open up the traps and we're getting anything, right? We have to shut it down at that point. Similarly, if we would see coyotes gnawing on the traps or whatever, we would shut that down. And that's how we account for it. We release them, and then we don't open that trap again. Got it. Until we're satisfied. The biggest thing that we have to face for really is ants.
Really?
Yeah. So the ants get into, they want to feed and everything else. So the animals, if they're in a trap and they get a bunch of ants on them, that's very detrimental as well.
Sure.
So we got that's the biggest hurdle. And there's ways of powder.
One of the benefits of the protocol we came up with is it's just one night of pre-baiting and then 2 nights of trapping and you're done, which is very efficient from a sampling point of view, but it also limits that. I mean, if you're running them for 10 nights, then you're really have more probability of that happening. And by then you're just catching the same animals over and over, so you're getting diminishing returns. So the system we came up with seems to be working very efficiently.
Yeah, I mean, most captures it's like a bell-shaped curve. So you get them the first, you pre-bait kind of attracting, you aren't opening it up or anything like that. And the first really night of trapping, you catch a lot, and then by second night, you're kind of hitting that peak and you're starting to get some recaptures. We found with third and fourth nights that you're really getting more and more recaptures. So are we missing some new ones? Probably, but from an efficiency standpoint, when you only have a small amount of people going out there and surveying 80 traps, the most efficient way to do it, and you get the most captures in that fashion.
Do we have an estimate for how many exist on the preserve right now?
On K-Rats? No, not on the preserves. We have an estimate for each trap grid that an actual count of each trap grid, but not an overall abundance of how many actually exist. We know certain amounts per acre, but yeah.
And then what are the targets in terms of moving it from a threatened species to a delisted species?
I don't know. That's a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service probably.
Yeah, so the recovery plan will have that. There's numerical targets for how many acres, how many populations.
And that has seemed to
It's been a long time since I looked at that.
To be honest, the recovery plan is still in a draft status. So it's not even finalized with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And if you go through, there's 10 steps in the back of that draft recovery plan that we took that. We met all those criteria. The assembly of the reserves, that's what really kind of moves the needle and down the threat.
Yeah.
Now the bar is a little bit higher, and it's moved as we've learned more. We've found more information, more data, threat analysis, that kind of thing. It has, but I don't think there's any real number at this point of how many and what % of occupation. I think that's where we continue to work with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to really kind of define that, and I think that's where the study will wind up ultimately going and leading us to that conclusion.
We take a trip back out to DC and
I think that'll be
that effort.
part of that effort. Yeah, we're waiting for year 3. Once we see that year 3, now we have 3 dots on the map, and you can kind of start seeing 5 years, kind of the shortest amount of time that we can make any kind of really trend. But I think we should start that legislative effort probably year 3, priming the pump. The 5-year status review will be coming up if it's not here, maybe following year. So we need to start planning that up. I think 2024 monitoring results, once we have those, we'll be able to make a better conclusion of where we're heading.
Okay.
We can see the light, we see the North Star, we know where we want to get to. We just might have to, plan our course, but it'll all depend on 2024's monitoring results. Once we get that third data point.
My gut feeling on that is it really will depend on the other responsible agencies to come on board. I mean, I think again, with 3 years of data, I think there'll be a pretty clear picture that populations are doing well on RCHCA reserves and other reserves where they're specifically managed for. They're not doing at all well on County of San Diego preserve lands or on military lands. Places where I used to catch a lot, they're gone because of land management. Lake Warner Basin, Lake Henshaw was the largest population on Earth back in the 70s and 80s. It's way down now because of overgrazing. They're, the Vista Irrigation District doesn't really care about the kangaroo rats. They're making money off the cattle. And so I think RCHCA is doing the right thing and meeting the criteria as good as possible. I think range wide, it's a matter of the other entities beginning to manage more properly and the population genetics. And that's one of the concerns, that some of these populations are so isolated that they're totally inbred and probably doomed without active management. So
I think,
the conservation biologist, that's my opinion.
yeah, and I think that's what we need to meet with the military. They're not going to, they're not in the business of managing endangered species, right? They want to go to the strongest fighting force the world has ever seen. That should be their primary focus. And so we need to be able to come up with a way that they can efficiently and quickly manage it and demonstrate those results. So we have that information. You said about the remote and grasslands. That's areas prime, but they don't have the resources at this point. There's no HCP. North County is supposed to come along. Northern San Diego is supposed to come along. They're a few years behind Western Riverside in a lot of sense. They don't have any HCP at that in Northern San Diego. It's in the process of being developed. I think once it's developed, then they'll have objectives and management criteria and this and that. But if we can help them along, and so we're in talks with the county of San Diego also. Cal Fire could go in there and develop a vegetation management plan and do a small scale burn. They do have the airport in there. They do a limited amount of grazing, but nobody's really organizing it in a way that's targeted grazing. RCHCA has developed their grazing program. So our goal is to not do it for them, but provide them with the tools. As Wayne said earlier, we created the management toolbox. You can now hand you your toolbox full of tools and say, here's how you build your house. Here's how your foundation's built. Here's how this. Here's your planning, and here's all the tools to do it and the materials you need to build that house. We're just not prepared or, to do it for them. But we can give them we can bring them up to speed as fast as we can. It took us 25, 30 years to develop the toolbox. So we can bring that on board as fast as possible. And hopefully it all gels together. We're assembling all the pieces and hopefully we can build a car at the end, take the vehicle to full recovery. But we have the engine, we have the suspension, we have the chassis, we have everything. You just have to put it together going forward.
In the interest of time, maybe we can talk about it later, but perhaps there's political problems.
Absolutely.
Okay, any other questions before we move on? All right, we're gonna move on to item 6C, it's presentation by Mr. Shomo on the activity regarding educational outreach program. Excuse me, my excuse me, my script is working. You have the floor. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so as part of the agency's mission, RCHCA provides an educational outreach program to increase awareness of threatened and endangered species in Western Riverside County and to commemorate the signing of the Endangered Species Act. Annually in the fall, RCHCA holds its outreach event called Celebrating Endangered Species Day for 5th and 6th grade students from local schools within our JPA. It does provide schools with a unique outdoor learning experience, and it also follows the NGSS standards. So during October and November, RCHCA hosted 3 events with over 330 5th graders in attendance from Hemet, Lake Elsinore, and Moreno Valley Unified School Districts. The events were held at the Southwest Multi-Species Reserve and the Lake Matthews Reserve. RCHCA staff provided a wildlife hike and class stations about habitat loss in the form of musical chairs, an SBR station, and displayed our tractor and UTV for students to learn about various land management methods. We also include an animal presentation by Wild Wonders, where the students learn about various animals and even get 2 pets on. So the Riverside Corona Resource Conservation District also participated in this year's event at Lake Matthews with a learning station about the Santa Ana sucker, which is a threatened species endemic to Southern California streams, and the importance of stormwater pollution prevention. As a follow-up and additional opportunity for learning, RCHCA provides art paper and colored pencils to the teachers. Students are asked to illustrate what the topic means to them based on their day at the reserve, with the theme where our world and the natural world meet. Once the art project is completed, the entries will be judged based on grand prize, runner-up, most original, and most creative. The awards for winning entries along with the participation awards will be given to the students during the scheduled presentation at each school in the spring. Okay, that concludes my report. And this is a receipt file.
Do you have any questions?
The Santa Ana suckers a fish.
It
It's not a person.
Very tasty.
Nice. All right, well, very good. Thank you very much. And this is a receiving files. We're just gonna move on to item 6D. This is Stevens Kangaroo Rat Reserve Management and Monitoring Efforts and Activities Update. And this is the case Mr. Shomo is giving that presentation.
Right here on it, as said, item 6D is SKR Reserve Management. You'll notice one of our key members of our team is not here. Harry Sandoval regretfully left us. He went to the county of Riverside to basically oversee the environmental programs division within the planning department. So he's moved on, and I am reporting on the items that he typically has handled. So maybe I can do his presentation justice here.
Oh, sorry, I had to
Oh.
close the floating panel. Okay, now try. There you go.
There we go. So basically, Terry had anticipated burning about 300 acres in the spring, for a variety of reasons. CAL FIRE, I think, typically plans for more than they can actually do. So they burned about 100 acres in the spring, and then certain environmental conditions rise, and then the point of ignition rises, and so they have to shut the burn down. Anyway, for the first time in 17 years that I've been here, they actually came back in the fall and conducted a fall burn. Which is one, surprising, and two, something we've been asking for a long, long time. The problem with spring burns is, one, it doesn't create kind of a natural fire regime. Most things burn here, as we know, in California, and naturally burn in the fall. But two, from a reserve management perspective, and Wayne talked about this, management is key for SKR, but all the SKR reserves want to burn at the same time every year. It usually occurs 1 week in June. CAL FIRE has limited resources, and so it's like a feeding frenzy with all the reserve managers trying to get all their burns done. And fortunately, RCHCA has been very successful at gathering most of those CAL FIRE resources, because we offer them a lot of land so they can train the way they would work, and they bring aircraft in and it's that. Well, that also doesn't leave much resources for like Southwest Reserve around like Skinner, Lake Paris, that kind of thing. And so their burns, you know, sometimes they happen, sometimes they aren't, sometimes they're smaller than we would prefer. So by spreading it out, if we can do this in the future, we can have a week in the spring and a week in the fall. We can double the amount of acreage we potentially could burn and manage for SKR, while also creating fuel breaks and fire breaks to protect our communities. And as long as the weather cooperates and there's similar weather conditions and we can do it safely, that's all the better. So anyway, we did 200-acre burn in October, I think the first week of October, and we now set up several 100-meter transects within those two areas to just see if the fall burn, how it compares to the spring burn. Does it burn hotter? Does it burn up more of the non-native grass you throw on the ground? That type of thing. What's the vegetation look like after a spring burn versus a fall burn? So we'll have some baseline data to compare those two things. After a burn, there's not much left. If it's done appropriately, you consumed a lot of the standing vegetation, but also the thatch. It's about 2 inches or so on the ground. It contains a lot of those non-native annual grass seeds. And so what we like to do after a burn is just prime for going in there and reseeding with SKR preferred fords, a light sage scrub mix in there as well. And so we did about 60 acres of broadcast seeding of SKR habitat following that burn. Brings in the next one. I spoke about this just earlier. We need to increase management within all our reserves. City of Riverside has one of the largest wilderness style parks outside of New York Central Park that's surrounded by urban development. So it's a really a neat feature of that city. It is about 1,200 acres, and the RCHCA has a non-wasting endowment on the city, and a lot of personnel has changed over time since we last really worked with them at our Parks and Rec department. And so some of those folks weren't even aware that we had an endowment, and they have about 100, I think that's 117,000. I think it's $117,000 of interest available to them to help manage that park for SKR. And so we've had several meetings with them and also city fire department. We want to get the roads regraded, one for public safety, if they have to access for a fire, other injuries or emergencies, get those roads taken care of. But also they're planning on doing a small scale prescribed burn. It's a big deal for the city because their city fire department doesn't typically do wildfire type burns, or mostly structure fires. So we're working with CAL FIRE to kind of as a consultant to allow them to burn in a certain way. We're going to start off small and hopefully build on to success. But the other thing, they have a huge mountain bike community there. There's no real master plan for the trail system in there. So they sometimes kind of go into sensitive areas. And so this money could also be used to help kickstart that master trail plan to identify areas where they can be and which areas maybe we should pull back a little bit. And again, create fire breaks and buffers around the Canyon Crest community and whatnot around the park itself to create buffers and wildfires. So great news to see them back on board. We're also able to go in there and monitor. There was a little bit of a hiccup based on our insurance. The city risk management has questions over the years. They had denied us at one point to actually go in and manage or monitor SKR in there. So we finally were successful in convincing them that our insurance is good. So it was just a little hiccup because of the way we're structured. We're WRCOG employees technically. Our workman's comp is through WRCOG that we're applying to RCHCA. It was just a whole mix up and just a little bit of communication. So anyway, we'll be in there managing and monitoring those shortly. And again, Wayne did an excellent job, I think, of explaining the range-wide monitoring program. Again, we just finished that up. I think it was last week of October, and you've seen a whole presentation on it, so I'm not going to get into it. But some more great picks of our skilled tech there. Liz Conyon, it's a whole group effort on the RCHCA. We're a small agency of 6 people, and we pull off some of probably the largest scale management and monitoring in the region for any kind of species. So we're proud of our staff. They do a heck of a job. It's all hands on deck and everybody comes out.
Small but mighty.
Yeah.
Do we have any questions? Sir, genuinely appreciate your efforts and your on the fly report. Item number 7 is report from the executive director, Dr. Kurt Wilson. I don't see him in the room.
Dr. Wilson was online, he left a message though. Said he's feeling a little under the weather, so he was logging off. This is about maybe 5 minutes ago. Wishing you all a wonderful holiday season. A preview for next year is that we'll be looking to focus onto the long-term future of the agency in terms of finances and structure. Looking forward to another great year. Thanks again to Brian and the staff.
Okay. All right.
Don't run off.
We're not running on very quickly.
Wait, do we get a stuffed rat?
No, I think it's even better. I don't think it's even better. Unless you're the program manager, we have a mentor. No. She had authored a children's. I can give you the kangaroo rat. Here's 52 copies on Amazon so far. Is it Redlands School District is asking you to read to the
Yeah,
kids?
Mission
Mission Elementary
Elementary School.
School.
No.
She had
Reading program.
somebody that's great illustrated. So we went out and bought a copy for each one of them. So
I think he's in one of
They
my.
better be signed though. They signed?
they are fine.
They are signed. Yeah, both signed. Oh, that's the sign. You know, actually.
Thanks for every board member, yes.
Yeah, okay, I need to sign copy though.
Everybody just get out loud.
You write the forward?
So I think it's a great, it just shows the passion that, our staff has for kangaroo rats, and also just making the world a little better place, it's a good story. If you read it to your children, your grandchildren, read it for yourself.
I think I've been friends with kangaroo rat house.
Well, she's working on a second. We're really proud.
Congratulations, that's great. All right, items for future agendas, any of the members here have any suggestions? I know it's a great amount of time between meetings, that's all you think about.
Right.
What other items would you like to discuss in future meetings? Yes, sir.
I mean, it's probably already on the docket for sometime next year, but I'd love to get an update on the Steel Peak Reserve, whatever it's on.
I can give you a kind of quick update now if you want, in a real formal update, but
Yeah.
for the last 2 years, we've been, I'm trying to Nice. We've been going back and forth with the regulatory agency to decide, we need their concurrence to allow us to do this. We've met every one of their goals that they have set. It seems to change over time. They had their legal counsel review our their HCP to see if it was allowed. We are waiting on that letter. That letter is keeps bouncing back and forth between Europe and Wildlife and CDF. We've sent what, over almost 20 emails. They keep telling us it's on the queue, it's the second in the queue. We continually make contact with them.
We still do have a grant of $650,000. And I spoke with our grant administrator, who said that grant will be there regardless, so that.
So maybe we'll give you a full blown update at the next meeting, but we may need to take it. If we're really interested in doing that, maybe we need to elevate it a little bit more than staff and an email, and maybe we draft a letter, and maybe send it from our attorney's office for, Chairman Mona's next year, and the vice chair, vice chair. And so maybe we need to elevate that.
Thanks.
All right, very good. Great suggestion. Any others? No. Ooh, okay. Any general announcements? Not the next scheduled meeting, the board of directors is scheduled for Thursday, February 8th at 11:30 a.m. It will be here at this office on Zoom. With that, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Find the date to the kids at the Worldmar Library.
It's the art fund. Thank you. I don't know if we, of course,